After due consideration, I've decided I'm both too busy and too narcoleptic to ever be a gaming channel. This video does not contain spoilers for the Miles Morales game, but if you'd like to go in completely blind as I pretty much did, leave this video running on mute, I guess, and go play this game. Insomniac's Spider-Man was and still is one of the best video game experiences myself and many others have ever had, and as far as AAA story-driven games go, it's remained in my top 5. So Miles Morales, both the game and the character, have a lot to live up to when Peter Parker splits for what's basically a European vacation, leaving Miles in charge of combating the Underground, a newly emerged domestic terrorist cell who end up putting New York civilians in the crossfire of their constant skirmishes with the encroaching gentrifying force of the Roxxon Company. Does the game manage to fill those shoes? Yeah, for the most part. I haven't been playing a ton of new video games this year for obvious reasons, so saying this is my favorite new release of the year wouldn't be saying much. It also wouldn't be true, but take my word for it, this game is great stuff. Though for reasons I'm going to get into, it's not quite perfect. I was a bit hesitant to buy this game on release, if you can actually believe it, knowing this would be significantly shorter than the first title. I was worried that it wouldn't have enough content to justify the price, but I was pleasantly surprised with just how much there was to do, and it more than warranted the $50 I spent for the PS4 copy. If the game suffers at all for its comparatively short length next to the first game, it's actually in the story department more so than the amount of content. I finished the game's story with loads of stuff still left to do, so it's not that the game itself is too short, but there's some really important plot and character turns toward the end that I feel were a bit rushed in execution. By the end, while I think this is quite a good story, I wouldn't say it holds a candle to the emotional highs of the first game. I'll go more into the specific moments I thought could have been handled better on the eventual spoiler cast for this game, but if you've already played through, you probably know what I'm talking about, especially when I say it involves the connection Spider-Man has with the villain. If you want to catch that spoiler cast, by the way, you should take a second to hit subscribe and also ring the bell so you get notified when I put up a video. Despite the narrative itself needing some more room to breathe, it's obvious that a lot of love and thought went into crafting the story just like the last one. Miles doesn't have a whole rogues gallery of villains just yet, but Roxxon and the Underground provide enough cannon fodder and unique scenarios to carry you through the story. There's some twists and turns involving the Underground especially that drive the emotion of the story, and I feel like a freaking moron that it took me until seeing a full body shot of a specific character to work one of them out. Even if it was cleverly hidden by the character in question also being race-bent and gender-bent from their usual appearances. It's far and away the most liberty that the games so far have taken with transplanting one specific character from another medium, though it proves necessary to once again address the fact that even all these years after his comics debut, Miles still doesn't really have any iconic villains to himself. If you know Miles Morales, you know that his uncle Aaron Davis is integral to his story. He's naturally here too, and the way he's implemented is unexpected and really fun. When you look at it broadly, there's maybe a bit too many similarities between Miles' story in this game and Peter's in the first, though it's hopefully not repetitive enough to bother most people. Miles himself has gone from an alright supporting character with his own solid arc to a more fleshed out and compelling protagonist. Movie Miles reminds me a lot of myself in terms of his inner conflict, if not necessarily his mannerisms. Game Miles, though, now that we've got to spend a lot more time with him, might as well be a gender-bent version of my younger sister. At the very least, Eden would absolutely sub to the Danicast, the pro-Spider-Man podcast that pops up as a counter to the returning J. Jonah Jameson rants, which ends each entry with a geeky, wholesome life hack. Like the backpacks in the first game, Miles has his own collectibles hidden around town that provide some world building and backstory, but this time it all pertains to specific character relationships, so they don't just color things in, they bolster the main dynamics of the narrative. And that's a good thing too, since I feel that divorced from all the flavor text in the gameplay, the characters in question suffer a bit from that rushed story problem I mentioned earlier. Before I stop talking about the story altogether, I'm gonna briefly get political, so skip to this timestamp if you want to avoid having any real-world issues impeding this fun superhero game review. For longtime viewers of the channel, this is basically the only political issue that I ever broach with any consistency, so you know what's coming. Know that what I'm about to say isn't a criticism of this game, more of a curious observation. I brought up when speculating about this game on some of my podcasts how they were going to handle the whole cop thing. namely how kind of off-putting it might potentially feel to be living in a world where it's more and more clear with each passing day that the institution of the police, or at least American police, are on the whole corrupt, rewarding violent, fascistic, borderline cultish behavior, and yet also have these games with a fictional world where cops are universally stand-up guys that no one has a bad word to say about, right down to our main character's dad being the epitome of hero cop martyrdom. Turns out this game's answer to that being the fictional world, while also clearly wanting to have some commentary in its story about these issues, is pretty much the same thing the first game did. Introducing a fictional sect of corporate-owned stormtroopers who can do all the shady crap real-world cops would do, but without any of the possible audience blowback. I don't know, I don't really have anything to say about that. I know Insomniac and the creatives behind this series certainly don't want or deserve that blowback, either personally or to have it overshadow the merits of the product. I just think it's fascinating how these games so clearly want to comment on accountability for policing, but are also probably the most explicitly pro-cop superhero narratives currently running in any medium. Maybe only beat out by the Arrowverse. These games are also 2 for 2 on these same corporate authorities trying to cover up a potential pandemic, so there's that. In terms of the gameplay and visuals, I like how the character comes through in some of that stuff. I like how everything about Miles is far more amateur than Peter, from his clearly less practiced quips to his much more awkward and gangly movement and swinging in combat. That said, Miles paradoxically also has a ton more style than Peter, and the amount of tricks and smooth moves he can pull off makes him somehow even more fun to swing around as. The combat itself is sufficiently different from the first game. Anyone who's played the first should be able to slip right back into the nearly identical base control scheme, but the addition of Venom, invisibility, and Miles' unique skill tree means there's some adjustments to be made if you want to get good. Miles also has a comparatively small tool belt, and it was really interesting trying to pull off things like stealth sequences without any of the gadgets and web tricks I'd relied on a lot as Peter. Thankfully, there's no extended sequences where you have to play through as a character without powers like the Miles and MJ sections of the first game, with the exception of one flashback sequence which I feel is really oddly placed. I didn't hate those sequences before, but I also didn't remotely miss them this go-round. The chemical, science-y puzzle-solving sequences have also been omitted, though I guess you could say they've been replaced with what I'm gonna call electricity puzzles, which are better, but which I also don't have a ton of patience for. I'm just not good at puzzles, okay? Overall, Miles might actually be more fun to play as than Peter is, and now it's ironically up to Pete's next outing to tweak his gameplay so it doesn't feel like downgrading to go back to him. This game looks gorgeous, but on the more negative side, it also spotlights a few more visual issues that I had. In particular, facial animations can feel a bit stiff at times. One really important character has basically the same expression for the entire game. And it's not taking me out of the story cutscenes constantly, but it is something I regularly notice. And I'm gonna say it, aesthetically it's starting to get a little tiring how every outfit worn by someone who's not Spidey or Doc Ock in this universe is some kind of chunky powered armor. It makes so many characters look real samey, only differentiated by color and size, and after a while it just makes for a superhero landscape where I'm no longer excited to see what new takes on characters look like, because I know it's just gonna be segmented armor. It looks like one not overly creative person designed literally everything. I also had a consistent issue with dialogue overlapping where it wasn't supposed to, which I was never hit with in the first game. I think I about covered all the outstanding stuff as vaguely as possible. Again, if you want to hear me go into more detail, then you should sub and wait for the inevitable spoiler cast that I'm going to be doing about this game, where I'll be going in depth more about the things that bothered me, as well as heaping a ton more praise on the things that I feel worked. In the end, while this review might sound like a mixed bag, I can't stress enough how worth it is to get this game if you enjoyed the first one. I'm assuming many of you have already played it, so if so, let me know what you thought about it in the comments, and I'll see you for the next one.